Welcome to the IT free training video on service accounts. In this video, I will look at service accounts and how to configure and use them in your organization. After you finish watching this video, you will understand how a service account can increase security in your organization. This video only looks at how to use and configure a service account. If you start using service accounts in your organization, you may want to look at ways to manage these service accounts. In the next video, I will look at ways of managing service accounts and some of the new features in Windows 7 and Windows Server 2008 R2 which make managing service accounts a lot easier if the software you are running supports them. What is a service account? A service account is created to run a particular service or application. This is done following the principle of least privilege. Least privilege is giving the user only the minimum rights and permissions required. For example, if a service account is created for file replication, it does not require rights to install software. A service account that is created to run a web server does not require access to change system settings. Following the principle of least privilege, a user account with just the right amount of access is created as a service account. The advantage of this is that if the user account used for the service account was to become compromised, the damage that could be done using that service account is minimized. To understand a bit better why a service account is required, let's look at what happens when a service account is not used. For this example, let's say you have 3 Exchange servers running on the network, 2 web servers, and 1 server with a third-party application. When software is installed, it is not uncommon for the software to ask for a username and password that will be used to run that software. In order to get the software to work, a lot of administrators will simply enter in a user account that has domain administrator access. There are a number of problems with this approach. First, when the password is changed, the password will need to be changed on all the servers that are using that user account. For this example, let's say that all the passwords were changed on all servers except the server running the third-party application. What would happen here is the server running the third-party application would still be using the old password and would attempt to authenticate using it. Since the password is incorrect, it would prevent the third-party application from running. The second problem is that since the server is using the old password, could this cause the account to become locked due to incorrect password attempts? If the account was to become locked, it would also affect other services and applications using that account on the network. An administrator would need to make sure that all software and services using that account had the password changed. Otherwise, just one of these services could cause the account to become locked, and other services and applications could be affected. After Service Pack 1 for Windows Server 2003, Active Directory checks the password given with the last 2 passwords used for that user account. If there is a match, Active Directory assumes that an old password is being used and thus does not lock the account. This helps prevent one service or application bringing down other applications on the network when user accounts are shared between different systems. In the old days, before this feature was introduced, a locked user account caused a lot of frustration to the administrator trying to track down the one location that was still using the old password. This is essentially the kind of problem that you have when you put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. The next problem is that passwords in Active Directory will eventually expire. When the password expires, the user account cannot be used until the password has been changed. If all of your essential services are using the same service account and it expires, this will cause all the software to stop working. I will now change to my Windows server to look at how to create and use a service account on that server and look at how we can address some of these problems. This server is not a domain controller, but has Active Directory administrative tools installed, so I can perform Active Directory administration. To do so, open Active Directory Users and Computers from the Start menu. Since this server is not a domain controller, I will get a message telling me that in order to edit local groups and users, I need to use the Local Users and Groups tool, not the Active Directory Users and Computers tool. Once I press OK, this server will automatically connect to the closest writable domain controller. To create the service account, I will expand down to Users, right-click Users and select New User to launch the New User wizard. The service account that I am going to create is for software called CWR Sync. CWR Sync is software that allows file replication with a protocol called rsync, often used by Unix-based operating systems. For the name, I will use CWR Sync, and for the login name, CWR Sync Service. Adding service to the end will help identify the account as being used for service rather than being a standard user account. Once I move on to the next screen, I need to enter in a password for the account. Make sure the tick box, User must change password at next logon, is not ticked. If this is ticked, the service account will not be able to be used until the password is changed. Normally this would occur when the user logged in, but since this account is a service account, this may never happen. Depending on your needs, you can also tick the tick box, User cannot change password. If someone does log in using the service account, which is sometimes possible depending on the application, this will stop the user from changing the password. The only way the password can be changed is by an administrator using admin tools such as Active Directory Users and Computers. The next option, Password Never Expires, you will want to tick to ensure that the service account does not expire because of the password policy of the domain. Ticking this option means that you will need to ensure that the password is changed regularly to maintain good security. I will now finish the wizard to create the new service account. Next, I will create a new group to put the service account in. I will do this by right-clicking Users and select New Group. In this case, I will call the group Service Accounts, since I will only put service accounts into this group. Remember, service accounts are really only user accounts. Since this group will only contain users, I will select the group scope as Global. To add the CWR Sync service account to the group, right-click on it and select Properties, and then from the Properties, select the tab Member Of. Once I press Add, I can enter in the Service Accounts group to make this user account a member. Each user account must have a group configured as a primary group. Now that two groups are associated with this user account, I can change the primary group to Service Accounts and remove Domain Users. The Service Account group does not have permissions assigned to it, and it never will. Creating the Service Account group means that the service account can be assigned to only this group, meaning it will not have any permissions or rights, not even domain user rights, since the domain users group was removed. Now that the service account has been created in the domain, I will exit out of Active Directory Users and Computers and open Edit Local Users and Groups from the Start menu. To give the service account administrator rights on this computer, open Groups and right-click Administrators and select Add to Group. This may be more access than required, and you will need to do your own research to determine how much access a particular piece of software requires. Remember, however, access for this service account has been limited to only this computer. Still better than using the domain administrator's account. Once I press Add, I can enter in the user account name that I used for the service account. Since the account is a domain account, Windows will prompt for a domain account to access the domain to retrieve information from the domain. Notice now that the CWR Sync service account has been added to the Local Administrators group. I will now exit Local Users and Groups and install the software that I created the service account for. I will skip past the Welcome, License, and Install Location screens. Some software you will install will prompt you for the service account username and password when installed. This can normally be changed after the install. In this case, I will accept the default service account so I can show you how to change it later. The software will now install. Once it is complete, I want to configure the service for this software to use the service account that I created in Active Directory. To do this, open Services from the Start menu. In this case, the software created a new service called rsync server. To change the user account that is used to run this service to the service account that I created, right-click the service and open the properties. For some software, it is just a simple matter to change the user account that is used to run the service. Other software may be more complicated and not as simple as changing the username of the service. You will need to refer to the documentation for the software that you are configuring to work out how to change the username for the service account that you are using. To change the user account this service is using, select the Logon tab. Press the Browse button and then select Location, since by default only the local security database will be searched and the service account exists in the domain. Once I select Entire Directory and go back to the last screen, I can enter in the user account I created to be a service account for this service, in this case, CWR Sync Service. You can see the CWR Sync service has been added. I now need to enter in the password or the service will fail to start. If the password were to change, I would need to come back here and enter in the new password. Once I press Apply, Windows will give you a dialog telling you the service account has been given the Log On as Service right. This essentially means the password was correct and Windows will let this service account be used to run this service. If I go back to the General tab, I can now press Start and the service will now be started using the service account that I created. As shown, the process of creating a service account is not that time-consuming, but configuring one for each server and service on your network can become quite time-consuming on a large network. The process of changing the passwords can also become quite time-consuming and difficult to manage. You can start to see why there is a big temptation to use the one domain administrator account for all the services in the domain. Using one domain administrator account means separate accounts do not need to be created. Also, using the domain administrator means all services and applications will have no problem running. However, this gives them a lot more rights than what they need. Let's review service accounts. A service account is a user account that has been created to run a particular service or software. The password for the user account should be configured to not expire to prevent outages. The user account should also be given the minimum amount of rights and permissions following the principle of least privileges. Passwords should be changed regularly to keep security high. In a large environment, this will start to become a lot of work, but this is the price to be paid for good security and a stable environment. In the next video, I will look at ways to help automate the use of service accounts in your company. Windows 7 and Windows Server 2008 R2 come with some new features that help with the management of service accounts in your organization and offer a new way to create service accounts that gives better security. I hope you have found this video informative. More videos are available for this free course and others on our website and our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.